Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And here we are. Let me do one thing here. There we are. And I'm going to hopefully make it a little bit bigger if I can. Let's see. Seems like I'm having difficulty doing that. Interesting. Yeah, there we go. That's good. All right. So here we go on chapter 4 of Genesis. Ha'adam yada et chava ishto. And I like to translate, I know it's very often translated as the man knew Eve, his wife. I like to see if we could translate yada as experienced. So I would translate it as the man experienced Eve, his wife. Vatahar, she conceived, and Vateled et Cain, she gave birth to Cain, Vatomer, and she said, Kaniti ish et Hashem, I have acquired a man with the Lord, with Hashem. Vatosef laledet et achiv et Havel, and she went on to give birth his brother Abel. Vayhi Hevel roetzon, Abel was a shepherd of sheep, the Cain, or herder of sheep, the Cain haya oved hadama, and Cain was a toiler in the soil, or in the earth, or the ground. Vahi miketz yamim vayave Cain mipri hadama, and at the end of days, Cain brought from the fruit of the earth, mincha Lashem, a gift to God. Hevel hevi gamhu, and Abel brought he too, although this gamhu is sort of interesting, right? Mi bechorot suno, from the firstborn of his flock. Umechel vehem, and the choicest of the choicest. Vayisha Hashem el Hevel, and the Lord paid attention, is the way that translates, we translate it often, to Abel and to his gift. The glancing over at the Aramaic, Vahavat Ra'ava min Kod Hashem, and Ra'ava min Kod Hashem means there was something to the effect of there was pleasure, something like, or I'm trying to think of the right word, somehow that God accepted Abel and his offering, right? Ra'ava is like pleasure, something like that, right? That God took pleasure. How's that? God took pleasure from Abel and his offering. Okay, take a look here. So we've got et Echav, et Havel, right? His brother, and then we've got Abel. So we're saying Hevel va'achoto, that this et that's put here actually represents Abel and his sister, Cain va'achoto, Cain and his sister, so that the Hebrew in some ways alludes to a sister that went along, a twin sister that went along, quite possibly twin. I think I'm okay saying that, along with the brothers. Now, I also had heard an interpretation to say, let's see. So, Shvateled et Cain, right? So there's a sister to Cain, and when it says et Echav et Havel, that in fact two sisters were born along with Abel. But we'll see. I don't know. That's not being said here. Okay. So let's just see if anything is referenced in that way. But we'll see where Torah Temimah wants to go with this. Et ribuyahu. So there's a principle that this word it, that is untranslatable in Hebrew, but indicates a direct object. That's what that word, it's a utility word that indicates a direct object. And not only that, but what he's saying here is that the word, when you see the word it in a sentence, because by the way, it is sometimes translated as the Hebrew word im, which means with, right? Sometimes it's translated with as to mean that in that context. But most of the time, 99% of the time, it's this utility word that we translate. But in terms of a biblical interpretation, classical biblical interpretation, ribuya means somehow an extension of some kind, a way to include more, right? It maximizes things. V'tam ribui zeh, right? And the rationale or the reasoning behind this extension, who kadei shelo yaksheh, right? So it's the purpose here is so that we're not going to have a problem. Efu nasu lahem hevel v'kayim nashim. Where did they get a wives, right? Where were their women for them to marry? Okay. Vehekimu haolam, so that the world could be established. So this answers that question. Ve'ien Sanhedrin Nun Chet Bet, he says, check out the tractate Babylonian Talmud Sanhedrin, page 58b, Ulefanenu beParshat Acharei, and again ahead of us in the Parsha of Acharei Mot, and Acharei Mot would be in Leviticus, but Pasuk Ve'ish Asher Yikach et Achoto Bat Aviv, where it says, and it lists in that parsha, it lists those consanguineous relationships that are forbidden. So here in this verse it says, and a man who takes, meaning in marriage, right, and consorts with his sister, the daughter of his father, or bat imo, or the daughter of his mother, chesed hu. It uses this term chesed, which normally we would translate right as some kind of loving kindness. And I believe, if my memory serves me, that the reason is that in that particular context of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, there it was an act of kindness on God's part to allow them to marry their sister, that God provided them with sisters whom they did marry. But of course, within Jewish law, it is forbidden. And according to Torah law, it is forbidden. Incidentally, the idea of marrying one's sister, interestingly enough, when I was reading the novel Hawaii by James Michener, they talk about the practice of the Hawaiians to marry the Ilui, their elite group, to marry their brothers and sisters, for sisters and brothers to marry. So obviously there were cultures where this took place, but the fact that what Torah Temimah is bringing out for us is the fact that it uses the term chesed in that context. There is a reference back to Adam and Eve. So we said that we went on to say that Cain brought, when at the end, at the appropriate time, Cain brought an offering to God, right? The idea, of course, to acknowledge the fact that these miracles of growth, etc., come from a divine source, a transcendent source. And Abel, of course, it emphasizes the fact that he brought the best. It doesn't say that about Cain, right? So, Meichal Vehem, right? And Chelev very often, the cream, when we talk about the cream of the crop. Mahu Meichal Vehem, right? So, what do we mean? What does the Torah mean when it uses this term Meichal Vehem? Mi Shim Nehon Didhu. In other words, from the best of them. So and this is using Aramaic terms here. So here we go. Klomar, that is to say, mehamevu muvchar, from the choicest, shebe'oto hamin, of that particular species. So That's what he brought. Lechad man de'amar, mefaresh lason zeh. Okay, I think this is man de'amar. According to one opinion, mefaresh lashon zeh ezehu davar shechelbo karev lemizbeach. So it looks like it says, he explains that this terminology, right, mefaresh lashon zeh, ezehu davar, some kind of thing, shechelbo, whose fat is offered up on the altar. Ve'ein kulo karev, but not the entire animal. And we know from our studies of Leviticus and other sources there that there were parts of the animal that were burnt on the altar, and essentially they were, and the Torah specifies that they were the certain fat parts that were offered up on the altar. So, Heve Omer Ze Shlamim. So, according to the one who understands that the Chalvehem means, in fact, I think what he's saying is here, who understands it in its literal form, meaning it's fat, refers then these kinds of offerings that Abel brought were Shlamim, right? Shlamim sacrifices that are termed shlamim in the Torah. And in shlamim, a shlamim sacrifice, part of it, the fat part, goes up on the altar and certain libations. Part of it goes to the priest, and part of it goes to the family who brought the offering. And other kinds of offerings are not necessarily shared in that way, only shlamim offerings. So they're saying that Abel brought a shlamim sacrifice, right? Umikan, and from this factor, from deriving from this, divnei Noach hikrivu shlamim, that the children of Noah, meaning before non-Jews essentially, is what the term Bnei Noach refers to, non-Jews as opposed to Jews, brought shlamim sacrifices, right? So that we'll see. We'll go on with this and take a look how he develops this. Aval stam matnitin dizvachim, but he says there is a Mishnah, right, in the tractate Zvachim that is an anonymous Mishnah, which usually represents a majority opinion. Besugyan, in our sugya, and he's referring to, look at this, here we go, Zvachim, right? That's where he took this from. So that's what he's referring to, that if you go back to that source, and you see in this Mishnah, the Bnei Noach lo hikrivu shlamim, that the children of Noah never brought those kinds of sacrifices. They never brought shlamim sacrifices. Rak olot, they only brought an olah sacrifice. What's the point about an olah sacrifice? Is that the entire animal essentially is burnt on the altar. There are, of course, parts of the animal that are burnt off elsewhere. Within Israelite society, an olah, when an Israelite brought an olah, the skin that is the hide of the animal, went to the priest, basically as a payment for performing the offering. But the entire offering essentially went up, either most of it, of course, going up on the altar, was burnt on the altar, and those parts of it, like the offal or things like that, would be burnt in a sacred place outside the compound. So there is a difference of opinion here. There is an opinion that looks at this verse and says, that clearly Abel was bringing, he'd be a ben Noach, was bringing shlamim, right, based on saying mechal vehem, but there's a majority opinion says that doesn't understand it that way. Ulechein, and people who do not hold that it was shlamim, mefarshinan pasuk zeh kamo shehetaknu. So most of this people then understand this verse mechal vehem to mean just the way we wrote it down. The kavanat halashon mechal vehen, that the intention of this expression mechal vehem Mishman nehon didhu, meaning from their cream, their best of them. Ukamo shekatavnu, just as we wrote above. The kavanat halashon, sorry, next line. V'Iyin Barambam, he says, and look further in Maimonides, Sof Hilchut Asur Isurei Mizbeach, and we're referring to Maimonides' code, his Mishneh Torah, and his section called Isurei Mizbeach, meaning things that are prohibited regarding sacrifices, right? Literally, it means the things of the altar that are forbidden. Perek Zayin, chapter, the way it's divided up, chapter 7, Halacha Yud Aleph, and those chapters are divided into halachot, into separate halachot. So Halacha 11. Hevimi Pasuk Zeh, he quotes this particular verse, L'samech shetzarich lahavi lakorban, that one has to bring for the offering, v'chein l'chol davar haba l'shem Hashem, and likewise, anything that you bring for God, in the name of God, or in other words, or for the sake of God, if you are making any kind of donation, any kind of offering, and donating it to God, min hayafeh, it needs to be from the most beautiful, mishubach, and the most praiseworthy, she'ba'oto hamin, that is in that particular species or class, or whatever you want to say. Ye'uyan sham ba'arucha, take a look at that place in the Maimonides, that Maimonides reference. Arucha would mean it goes at length in it to that particular point. Umevoar lefi zeh, and what will be cleared up or clarified according to this. Shegam hu ichria, that Maimonides himself also lent towards, he preferred Kamanda Amar, according to those who say, De lo hikrivu b'nei Noach shlamim. He agrees with the opinion that the sons of Noah did not bring shlamim sacrifices, delidide, because according to him, heve pirush mechal vehem, because according to him, the explanation of this word mechal vehem, mishma nehon, would be from their best, right? Kemavuar, as is explained. So let's make sure that I'm saying this to you correctly, right? So yes, Mishmane Horn would mean the best of, not from their fat, but from the best that they had to offer. And just as we did up here, see Mishmane Horn Didho. So we have this word in Hebrew that can be understood in two senses, and it is in fact discussed by authorities in two different ways. Let's see if we can take another one. Ah, yes. We get to this section here, right? So, ve'el Cain ve'el minchato, and to Cain and to his present, his gift, lo sha'a, right? He didn't take any pleasure in it, right? Or he did not show any favor. Vayichar l'Cain ma'od, and Cain was stirred up in great anger. He was very angry. Vayiplu panav, and his face fell. Vayomer Hashem el Cain, and Hashem said to Cain, Lama chara lach, why are you angry? V'lama naflu panecha, why is your face, why are you crestfallen? Halo im tetiv sa'et, because if you do the best you can, if you try your hardest, sa'et, there will be uplift, right? You'll be lifted up. V'im lo tetiv, but if you don't do your best, the fetach chatat rovetz, sin crouches at the door. Ve'elecha teshukato, and to you is its desire. Va'ata timshol ba, I'm pretty sure. Well, yeah, but you bo, it's masculine, but you can govern it. And this is a very profound and powerful little phrase here going on here. That despite the fact that one is, in terms of free will, right, and in terms of the internal battle that we face, that there may be things that anger us. And of course, in this particular case, did Cain have a right to be so upset, right? So Cain might have argued, well, I brought a gift. And God was saying to him, yeah, but it really wasn't a gift from the heart, right? You just casually gave a gift. The idea in terms of what does a gift communicate? And instead of looking at what he did wrong, right, he simply looked at how Abel's offering was accepted and resented it. Of course, we know to what degree he resented it, but it's a very basic human experience. And as I said, it's something that in some ways gives us an insight as to how the Bible looks at free will, because it says we are capable. We do have a cerebral cortex to control what's going on in the amygdala. So there we go. Despite its very strong effect on us. So we are going to be held responsible. All right, let's take a look. Im tetiv v'gomer, if you do well, etc. Tanya, so we have an early source, Mishnah times. Isi ben Yehuda Omer, Isi, the son of Judah, says, V'ze echad hamikraot. This is one example of a scriptural verse, she'ein lahem hechreya, which does not necessarily have only one way to interpret it. In other words, if you connect it in one way, it's going to have one meaning. And if you connect it in a different way, like if you, as it were, put the commas in a different place, you're going to get a different meaning. And we'll see. We'll start. We'll take a look at it. All right. And of course, he has a bit to say here. We'll see if we can get through it. Sheyesh lin totat lamala ulamata, because you can connect the word either to the word before, meaning above, ulamata, or below, or to the word that follows. Kamo hacha, for such as in this particular case, deyesh lefaresh im tetiv set lashon slicha, which we can understand if you do well. Sa'et is lashon slicha, meaning forgiveness, right? Kamo noseh avon. In other words, this root noseh, right? I believe the root would be nasa, nun sin aleph. But the point is, in this context, it says, right, who overlooks iniquity or forgives iniquity. That's what this Hebrew phrase means. And the sa'et here is a noun form, like a gerund of the verb. Or sa'et im lo tetiv. Or you could, in other words, here we're now commenting im tetiv, comma, and then sa'et im lo tetiv, right? Belashon nesiot avon hu. Let me make sure I have it, right? In other words, I think here it means, and the iniquity is going to be emphasized. It's going to have a greater significance. Ukamo, and he gives the example of this usage of the word sate in a different context, that he seal otam avon oshma, right? Meaning he attributed to them the sin of guilt, the iniquity of guilt. Right? So let me see if I have this correct, right? Okay, let's keep going. Cain piresh Rashi, and so Rashi explains. Udavar ikar drashozo, and in the main point, right, the essence of this particular interpretation, Ien pirush Rashbam, he says, take a look at the interpretation of the Rashbam. The Rashbam was one of Rashi's grandchildren, and he wrote an interpretation of the Torah that basically understands it in a very literal kind of sense. Sof Pasha Vayishlach, at the end of the Parsha of Vayishlach, that's in Genesis, where we talk about Jacob meeting up with Esau. But Pasuk regarding the verse, Timna Haita. So this is at the end of the Parsha Lishlach, and it talks about Esau's descendants, and it says Timna. This is a girl, her name Timna. Haita v'gomer was, etc. Ki harbe tevot batorah, because there are many words in the Torah. She'efshar, or maybe tevot would be a letter sometimes, but let's take a look. She'efshar lahamshich hamila lamala ulamata, where you can either attribute the word to the word before or to the word for the word that follows. Afal pi she'ein hechrecham b'chiyuv. Even though that's what it seems to be saying, even though there is no certain way in which to understand them. So I'm looking to see, I want to make sure whether or not he's making a different point here. That if you put the first interpretation of sate to the first one, it means forgiveness. And I wonder if actually what he's saying, I need to look and double check in Parshat Naso, whether Hisiu utam avon oshna means that he forgave them the sin of guilt, or whether it means he paid more attention to it. So, which would make sense. At any rate, I need to be certain. The Ien, I'm not sure what this is. Maybe Tirgum Yonatan. There's another Targum. There's Targum Onkelos. There's also Targum Yonatan, right? Let's see. Oh, no. Could be Talmud Yerushalmi. I'm going to go with that. And look at the Talmud Yerushalmi here. Shekatfu lefi ha-perush hasheni, who interpreted according to the second interpretation, Havav de ve'im lo tetiv, that the vav of ve'im, and if you do not do well, meyutar, they understand that it's not necessary. Ve'ien, and check out Od Barashbam, and again, check out the Rashbam, Sham, in that reference to the Rashbam, the Pasuk, Ve'aya, Ve'ana. Right, so there's a listing of descendants, and there's this Vav that seems unnecessary there, where it should just say Aya and Ana, and it says and Aya and Ana, and in that context, that Vav, this Vav of Va'aya, doesn't seem to make sense at all. So we're going to leave it obviously here for today. I want to be more certain about things as far as that interpretation is concerned. And we'll make sure we understand exactly what's going on here. So I'm going to stop the share. And any questions for the record? Harlan?
Yeah, I was wondering how many sisters did even
Cain,
her husband have?
right, Cain and Abel. So he doesn't comment on that. I think there, the way he says it, it just sounds like each one had a sister, had one sister. I will tell you that I remember when I studied this many years ago that there was the person who was teaching me took every instance of the word et, right? And because there were three instances of the word et, that each one et referred to a sister. I don't think that's where Torah Temimah understands it, because in terms of what Torah Temimah was saying, is we just want to explain where Cain and Abel each had a wife. So we only need two sisters, and it's quite possible that that's why he feels that there's a, you know, that the even though that there are three it's, one of them is needed from a grammatical point of view, and the other two are there to indicate more than just Cain and Abel were born, but they had sisters as well.
How do I know that they didn't have children?
Um, well, we know about Cain's children, okay, because we're given that information. With Abel, we don't. We don't know that Abel had a child at all, but just the fact that they would have married and had partners. That the idea of having a partner is, as you can see, very, very fundamental in the early chapters of Genesis, where God says, man, Adam needs a helpmate. So the idea of coming together like that's very important. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.